Big changes have been announced for landlords in England and Wales about EPCs and the minimum energy efficiency standards that will start to come into force on the 1st of October 2029. This was part of the announcement on the 21st of January 2026 about the new Warm Homes Plan, which will have a significant impact on the private rented sector in England and Wales. And I waded through hundreds of pages of documentation to figure out what it all means for landlords. And while the headline is that landlords need to reach an EPC C on their properties by 1st of October 2030, unless they have an exemption, which includes a cost cap of £10,000, there's a lot more to it than that. And this is because the goalposts will change after the 1st of October 2029, when the way that EPCs are measured will become a lot tougher. And your well-insulated house with an efficient gas boiler won't get an EPC C under these new rules. And in this video, I explain exactly what landlords need to know about these changes so that you're informed about what's coming. It's important that we understand the new rules as it will affect every private landlord in England and Wales. And sure, things may change between now and 2029, 2030, but the direction of travel is clear. And I always plan for the worst and hope for the best. And stick around till the end as I give my take on what I think it all means for landlords and my own thoughts about my own rental properties that are Victorian houses. And who am I? I'm Suzanne Smith. I'm a former corporate solicitor who became a landlord in 2019. And I set up the Independent Landlord website and YouTube channel to bring independent, reliable, and straightforward guidance to everyone in the private rented sector. You can sign up for my free weekly newsletter and find lots of other resources, including a detailed blog post on EPCs on theindependentlandlord.com/YouTube. Right, let's crack on. First of all, what is the new minimum energy efficiency standard, or MEES, going to be? Well, all rental properties in England and Wales will need to have an EPC C by the 1st of October 2030, or register for an exemption. But for all EPCs issued from the 1st of October 2029, it won't be the EPC as we know it. This is because new metrics are going to come into force, and that's going to be called the home energy model. And it will be a lot harder to get an EPC C after the new metrics in the home energy model are launched. And I'll get onto that in a bit. But first of all, let's try and start with the bit of good news, which is what are the exemptions, before I get into the tough new metrics for EPCs. Right, for the exemptions, the first one is the cost cap. Landlords do not need to spend more than £10,000 for upgrades, and this will drop to 10% of the value of the property if the property's value under 100,000. And the clock for the cost cap has already started as of the 1st of October 2025. So if you've done any upgrades since then, like I have, they'll count. Number two, solid wall insulation. I know that this is a big issue for landlords. There's going to be a 10-year exemption where a landlord can choose not to install solid wall insulation. And if this is the only remaining measure available to bring the property up to standard against the fabric performance metrics, which I'll get onto in a bit, they can get an exemption. And the government's introducing this exemption on the basis that there is a significant risk of damp and mold if solid wall insulation is not installed to the correct standard. So what that means is that if you've got a Victorian house, like I do, and you've done everything that you can to try and get it up to EPC C, and the only thing left for you to do is insulation of the walls, then you can get an exemption for that. I've managed to get an EPC C on my Victorian properties without wall insulation, but a lot depends on how the properties are constructed. Landlords will need to make a declaration as part of registering for the exemption to verify that the property remains below standard because they have chosen not to install solid wall insulation. The third one is third-party consent. This is already an existing exemption for third-party consent, and that will go on. And that applies when the improvements needed require the consent from the freeholder, the planning authorities, the mortgage company, or the tenant, and they refuse to give consent. And the landlord can apply for an exemption if, despite best efforts, which is actually trying quite hard, that consent cannot be obtained or is given subject to conditions which can't be reasonably complied with. This exemption lasts 5 years, but if the issue was a lack of consent from a tenant, it will last until the tenancy ends or is assigned to a new tenant, and then the landlord would need to carry out the work. The next one is a new landlord grace period. If a landlord buys a tenanted property, they get 6 months to comply with the MEES before enforcement begins. The next one is all relevant improvements made. So if your EPC or an approved report says no further improvements can be possible and the property remains below the standard, then you'll get an exemption. And there's another one, negative impacts exemption. So this gives flexibility for the type of properties in the PRS, including the older traditional constructed properties and those of heritage significance. So landlords will be able to register an exemption where they can provide evidence that a measure would negatively impact the property or where it would devalue the property by more than 5%. Now I'm going to talk about the new home energy model, which will be the only methodology to assess EPCs from the 1st of October 2029. Up until now, it's been based on the energy efficiency rating, which is a cost-based methodology. But it's going to change on the 1st of October 2029, assuming that the rules go ahead. And it's currently out to consultation. So under the proposals, unless you've got a grandfathered EPC, which I'll get onto in a minute, landlords must meet EPC Band C against two metrics. The first is the fabric performance metric, and the second is either the heating system metric or the smart readiness metric. And the landlord can choose between the heating system metric and the smart readiness metric. So this is called a fabric first approach because the landlord must first make investments to meet the fabric performance metric. And once the property meets this or they register a valid exemption, then they must invest in installing measures to meet their second chosen metric. Right, I'll now go through the metrics. The first one is the fabric performance metric, which measures a building's thermal performance, and that means its ability to maintain a different temperature to its surroundings. And what counts for this is the level of insulation, the window quality, and whether or not it's airtight. This will be similar to the existing cost-based EER rating. So for the heating system metric, this assesses the technologies used to generate heat for heating, cooling, and hot water and cooking. And the consultation says that systems with a high efficiency and low carbon emissions, such as electric heat pumps and low carbon heat networks, will always score a C and above. But a gas boiler, even an efficient gas boiler, will not achieve an EPC C rating under the home energy model. And even if you have electric heating, you're not necessarily going to get a C. And that's because if you have electric heating with no or insufficient thermal energy storage, it will always score D or below. However, an electric heating system with thermal storage may score a C or above, and this is the sort of thing that we're going to need to get help on. And so they're proposing that no home that relies on primary fossil fuel space or water heating, such as a gas boiler, should be able to get a C on the new heating system metric. So the next one is the smart readiness metric, which is a bit of a misnomer, really, because what it really means is microgeneration, usually in the form of solar panels, and to integrate smart technologies that can optimize energy consumption. The consultation explicitly says microgeneration, such as solar, along with a smart meter, would be sufficient to achieve a C rating. So there's a lot of detail in smart readiness, and this is the sort of thing that we all need to get advice on, whether we decide to go the heating route or the microgeneration route. So let's talk about the transition arrangements. There's an important concession for existing EPC Cs as of the 1st of October 2029. This is because the government wants to encourage landlords to make improvements to the energy efficiency properties before the 2030 deadline. And it's therefore allowing any EPC C that is assessed before the 1st of October 2029 to be compliant, even though it will be done under the old rules, the easier rules. And depending on the date of the EPC, this may expire in 2039, as the government has also announced a bit of good news that they're going to keep the 10-year validity for EPCs. I expect that EPC assessors are going to be very busy in 2029, as everyone with an EPC C will be wanting to renew them. I certainly will. And what happens if landlords don't meet EPC C by the 1st of October 2029? Well, they'll have a year to get up to EPC C under the new system, and they'll need to get an EPC done under the new system so they know what improvements they have to make. And if they don't reach it by the 1st of October 2030, then they won't be able to let. It will be illegal to let unless they register for a valid exemption. So, what does all this mean? Well, we as landlords have got a lot to think about when it comes to EPCs, and it's worth checking if you're eligible for grants. And often grants are available if tenants are on benefits. But assuming that everything goes ahead as per the current proposals, which is a big assumption, landlords now have 3 years and 8 months, as I'm recording this on the 26th of January, to obtain an EPC C under the existing easier EPC metrics and benefit from the transition arrangements which grandfather those EPC Cs. So if you've got an EPC C before the 1st of October 2029, you're going to be able to leave the decision about exactly which metric you're going to get when you renew them. And who knows, maybe the price will come down. It's important to realize that if you don't get an EPC C by the 1st of October 2030, whether it's an old one under the grandfathered rules or under the new rules, if you don't have an exemption, then you won't be able to let your property. And there are lots of penalties. Now, I have Victorian terraced houses that are now all EPC Cs. I've invested in that, doing lots of insulation, new windows, etc. And I did that a little while ago because I figured that the closer we got to the deadline, which was originally supposed to be at the end of 2025, I thought that the various trades and materials would be in short supply. Now the deadline's moved back just under 4 years. I don't actually regret my decision of raising all my properties to EPC Cs because at least I'll benefit from the transition for 10 years as I'll be renewing the EPCs in the summer of 2029. But like everybody else, I'll then need to decide whether to install a heat pump effectively or solar panels, or see if something else comes along that's suitable for the houses when the EPCs expire. And a lot can happen between now and then. Technology may improve, the cost may come down, or some of the dates and the rules may change. Who knows who's going to be Prime Minister then? So I appreciate that this is quite a lot to take in. It is complicated and you've probably got questions. But if you found this video useful and you'd like more support, including the ability to ask me questions at twice monthly live streams, plus courses, templates, checklists, then you can join the Independent Landlord Hub and you can find out more on theindependentlandlord.com/hub. See you soon and hopefully in the hub.